Hello, my name is Courtney Snyder, and today I will be presenting on the topic of capital punishment, specifically about the history of capital punishment in America. And you'll also be hearing from my other group members, Dylan, Colin, Greg, and Rachel. So just for an overview of what I will be talking about, I'm going to cover the history of capital punishment in the U.S., where America stands today, and then my group mates are going to cover the different sides of the topic, so the retentionists and the abolitionists, and then give some example court cases. So to start off with the history of capital punishment is also known as the death penalty and has been around for centuries in America, and it is the legally authorized killing of someone convicted of a capital crime. Originally, America was persuaded by the British to establish the use of the death penalty when the European settlers came to the New World. So, the first ever recorded execution in the new colonies of America was in Jamestown, Virginia in 1608, and the man's name was Captain George Kendall, and he was sentenced to death for being a spy in Spain. So, this execution is important because it allows us to compare crimes punishable by death 400 years ago to present time. So back then, the laws varied from colony to colony, similar to how the laws vary from state to state today. So in Virginia, some crimes punishable by death included minor offenses such as stealing grapes, killing chickens, or trading with the Indians. In the New York colony, offenses such as hitting one's mother or father or denying the true God were punishable by death as well. And all this information comes from the early history of the death penalty from 2003. So, do you guys think all states should have the same qualifications for capital crimes to avoid confusion, to just make more cohesiveness? So for more history, times have obviously changed from the 1600s regarding capital punishment. However, America has had a long debate over the past centuries, causing the death penalty regulations to change very often. The death penalty has undergone various changes throughout the years, falling in and out of the public's favor. So in the later 1700s, once America gained its independence, almost all of the colonies considered capital crimes to fall under piracy, murder, slave rebellion, burglary, and rape. So colonies began to rethink the death penalty and tried to limit the number of capital crimes. Northern states such as Virginia, Pennsylvania, they attempted to lessen the number of crimes punishable by death. However, southern states seem to be increasing the numbers of crimes punishable, specifically targeting slaves. And all this is according to Hockhammer from the Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology in 1970. So during these times, people were executed by hangings that were available for public viewing. So fast forwarding to the mid 1800s, states start to abolish the death penalty finally. Michigan was the first to completely get rid of it in 1846, followed by Rhode Island and then Wisconsin. So, getting into the more recent times, in the 1940s to 1960s, protests were held frequently, and Americans were demanding a stop to the death penalty. So after these numerous protests, the number of executions started to decline. For example, in 1940, there were only 2 executions total in America. So there then came a time in America's history where there is an unofficial moratorium. So a moratorium is a delay or suspension in an activity or law, and this was unofficial because it was never specifically claimed by the United States government or by any state governments that this was happening. However, it was just all around known that there were no executions taking place. So this time period lasted from 1968 to 1976, during which not a single execution took place. So an example of a court case during this time period comes from the 1972 case of Furman versus Georgia, during which the Supreme Court ruled capital punishment unconstitutional and in violation of our 8th Amendment ban on cruel and unusual punishment because of the inconsistency of who was executed and who was not. And all this information comes from Trial and Error, Capital Punishment in U.S. History. So after this newfound viewpoint of the Supreme Court, they suggested that states create new capital punishment laws that are more specific, that they could then consider and then decide what they're going to do from there on. So 35 states participated in the creation of new laws, and these laws created two very, very broad groups. The first group contained states like Georgia, Texas, and Florida, and they made it known which crimes were punishable by death and which weren't. However, they also had a system set up to decide whether the death penalty should be used or not. The system involved mitigating and aggravating circumstances. So the only way someone could be put on death row is if the aggravating circumstances outweighed the mitigating. So the second group of laws represented by North Carolina and Louisiana were much, much simpler. They laid out a very specific list of capital crimes, and if you were convicted of that crime, you were sentenced to death no matter what. They had no stipulations. They just laid it out simply like that. And this all comes from A History of the Death Penalty in America in 2012. So without all the cohesiveness of the law across all states, there were lots of inconsistencies with death row inmates and their executions. Executions began again in 1977, but the next 8 years to follow, there would only be 50 executions in total in America, with 2,000 prisoners on death row. So the capital punishment standing in America has been a roller coaster of different policies and rulings because they cannot come to one general consensus on this topic. So, currently in the United States today, their capital punishment is legalized in 28 states, Ohio being one of those, and then it is not in effect in the remaining 22 states. States are always changing their policies frequently throughout the years based on rulings and fairness and reliability, plus the cost of implementing the death penalty. And this is all according to McKinsey in 2019. So, in terms of execution, the primary method used across all 28 states is lethal injection because it is the most effective and, as far as I know, causes the least harm to the inmate. However, additional to the lethal injection, some states such as South Carolina, Florida, and Tennessee have a secondary method which may include electrocution, lethal gas, or hangings. So, according to the Death Penalty Information Center, as of January 1st, 2020, there are 2,620 inmates on death row. In the previous year, 2019, only 22 executions took place in America in total. So, with the lack of stability in capital punishment laws, prisoners are left sitting on death row for years or even the rest of their lives. So do you think the United States will ever come to a consensus on this issue, or do you think it'll always be divided? So just a little summary. Capital punishment has always been a long-lived debate in America, and as far as we know, always will be. The U.S. used to have much harsher executions and a longer list of capital crimes. However, times have changed. So as time went on, the states defined these laws and made them more stable. So the United States currently is almost split in half, with states that allow capital punishment and those that don't. But throughout history, it's been very evident that there have been many disagreements with the death penalty, which lead to protests, many adjustments to the law, and controversy. So here's my work cited, and then the rest of my group members are going to discuss the different sides of the debate, the abolitionists and the retentionists, and then give some examples for court cases throughout the years. So thank you.